Left off talking about invulnerability. We're going to finish the hazardous attitudes here. Being invulnerable. So it turns out there's an age where this is more prevalent, but just because you're not at that age doesn't mean it can't be prevalent. Wow. So it's more of an age in flight time. Anybody know where this becomes important? Or I shouldn't say important, a concern, a big concern. Turns out there's 2 times in flight time age. One is right around 100 hours, maybe just after your private, depending, you get it between 60 and 100. I think the national average is like 78 or something like that now for fixed wing. So right around 100 hours, you start feeling really good. You're competent. You know how to land the airplane, mostly. And the other time that this happens, it's right around 1,000. That happens again. It's the exact same thing. It's a normal human behavior. All these are. These aren't abnormal behaviors. But so we don't get up every day thinking, today's my day, I'm really vulnerable. I mean, maybe you do, and that's part of your I'm safe checklist. And you're like, okay, I like that timeout thing that BJ was talking about. That's awesome. You give yourself a timeout, not today. But day to day, we feel invulnerable, and there's also an age range, and that's about the age of the folks that are learning how to fly and the age of the folks that are teaching the people that are learning how to fly. You just don't notice it. It's hard to see that. Now that I'm not at that age, I can look back at when I was and go, wow, that was stupid. So whenever you catch yourself thinking, I'll be fine. That's the one I use. It's going to be fine. That means I'm invulnerable. And it turns out I'm not. And I get reminded often that I'm not the smartest person. I'm not the strongest. I'm not the best pilot. And you know what? I'm okay with all of that. Because once you start thinking you are, you become invulnerable. And that's not true. And then you're becoming a hazard. And that fix is to say, it can happen to me. And that's a tough thing to see sometimes. Okay, now this one, resignation. The people in here learning to be pilots, you're not often resigned. What does that mean? I quit, I give up. The people that are in flight instructors, never have you thought that, I don't think. Or maybe you have, maybe as a student. But you wouldn't be in this world if this was you. You wouldn't have made it here already. I've got 2 examples of resignation. Both are true. One is more unbelievable than the other. One happened to me on a flight instructor check ride for my initial CFI. Back in the 80s, all CFI check rides had to go through the FAA. And there were no DE-issued initial check rides. Now, you could do an add-on. So I had to go to FSDO. So the average, I want to say at the time, for the FSDO check rides, the orals were running right about 4 hours. Okay, so I don't know everything. I still don't. I'm learning stuff all the time. I brought a giant bag of books to sit next to me during this 4-hour oral because I knew I was going to get asked a question, maybe the second one, that I didn't know the answer to. But I was going to tell the FAA POI that's giving me the check ride, I know I don't know that, but I know it's in this book right here. Well, I did that. So about 3.5 hours later, after we were talking about mock, tuck, and Lear jets, I'm like, well, we're flying an Archer today. I've never flown a Lear jet. I can read the words mock, tuck, but I can't teach it. So anyway, we were talking about that, and then we got to, what are you going to do on a go-around? What's the procedure? So I explained the procedure in the oral on a go-around. When do you retract the gear? I said, well, I'm going to wait until I have positive rate and no runway remaining, and then I shall retract the landing gear. I said that. Well, the pleasant examiner sitting across from me, the FAA POI, did not like that answer. And he didn't yell, but he used a mild profanity that relates to bull excrement. And he said, no, as soon as you are, what do you think they do in a 747? Flying an Archer. I don't know. As soon as they add power, they bring the gear up. So if we go around, I want you to get that gear up. Yes, sir. He's the FAA. Okay, all right. Pre-flight, done with the oral, seemed like it took months. It didn't. We go fly. We're out in the practice area. There's some things I did pretty well and some things I didn't do so well on. But now we're coming back into the airport. And on the way in, it was exceptionally busy into the airport. And I made a call, I got ATIS, made a call to the control tower and said, this is 6 Echo Charlie, we're 10 miles west, inbound information, Bravo for touch and goes. Okay, and at the time it was an ATA, same exact thing as Class Delta. No response. I hear everybody talking. I can hear all the people in the pattern. I hear the controllers talking to everybody. He doesn't answer me. Now I'm outside of Class Delta still. But I got an FAA inspector sitting, actually he's in the left seat, I'm in the right seat. Okay, well first thing I do is I troubleshoot the radios. The microphone out? Did I select the right one? Is it the right frequency? Is my squelch okay? Is my volume okay? Everything's working. I get a break, I make another call. 6 Echo Charlie, 10 miles west, Bravo, whatever I said it was. We're gonna do touch and goes. Nothing. Now here comes, what do I have to get into Delta? Two-way radio communication. I don't have to have permission, but I have to have communication. We're coming into Delta, and I make a third call. And I make this call, 6 Echo Charlie. Now we're 6 miles at that point. Delta was a different size back then. Blah, 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 blah. No word. Now, I'm gonna go fly into Delta if I don't make a turn, and I've got an FAA inspector right here. Now this is really cool. I was gonna talk about this. This is that, I like this airman's rights. I'm taking this home with me. Actually, I had some information today to give you that I'll just touch on. So, didn't have that then. It was the big stick, and he's sitting next to me. So, I look at him, and I'm thinking, actually he's sitting over here, how did he pull the circuit breakers on the radio? Because they're in front of me. What is going on? So I was taught, if you've got a problem, don't fix it in the pattern, depart and go someplace else. So now, we're getting close, and I tell the FAA inspector, I say, I am going to turn, and we're gonna depart, and we're gonna go out here to the northwest, and I'm gonna figure out why this radio is not working. And it sounds calm, but I wasn't calm. I was stressed. So I tell him that, briefing him, and I start my roll to the left, and I'm clearing out here to the left across him, and there's people it's a busy, just like this, it's hopping. And as I start this turn, my friend sitting right here exploded. What are you doing? I just told you. That's what I'm thinking, and I'm looking at him. Turn this beep, beep, plane around. Okay. I've never been yelled at in an airplane. Now, I have been taught, we're going to get to the laws of learning. We've talked about that. There's a couple. I was taught by an individual who was taught by another individual, yes, who believed that the laws of learning were F, C, and R. Fear, sarcasm, and ridicule. That's not the way you're supposed to teach. It's effective. It worked on me, but that's not that. So this guy obviously believed in that. He's yelling at me, so I'm in this left turn now. I'm about 180 degrees through it, gonna head out that way. And he says, get this plane turned around and get in the pattern. Now I'm in this left turn. Tower finally decides and says, 6 Echo Charlie, is that you in a left 360? That's affirmative. Roger, sir, never do a 360 in the pattern, I'm not in the pattern, without approval from the tower. Told me to. Who's pilot in command? Yeah, I am. Not him. I learned that the hard way. Now, my stress level went from check ride stress level with an FAA inspector till, I don't know, the orbit of Saturn someplace. So I'm thinking, wow, this is it. My career is now over. I have an FAA inspector screaming at me, literally, and his face was red. And while we're in this turn, and the tower says that, he looks at me and says, I've got your ticket. Wow. Wow, that was fun the last couple years flying. Wow. That's what he said to me. So I'm in this left turn, and now tower's giving me, okay. Turn left, on a left 4 mile 45, runway, whatever. Okay. And now I'm thinking, well, this is sad. This is sad. I'm no longer in the flying game, right? I'm thinking about the future, not the next 30 seconds or 5 minutes for the landing. So we finally get around on the 45. Now we're at midfield, downwind to beam. I put the gear down, and I'm trying to teach him, explain what I'm doing while I'm flying. But now I've lost all focus. I'm on the landing gear down, and I'm getting ready to cry, and yeah, bring the power back, pull the flaps, all right, and set pitch attitude. I finally get on final, and now we're on final, and on this particular airplane, did all my training in a high wing. We were just going to do the complex stuff in the low wing. I only had like 3 hours in this particular type of airplane. And he goes, no, we're not switching airplanes, we're just using this one for everything. I go, so I'm doing a short field, and I'm trying to talk my way through it, and here it comes, and we get just about ready to touch down, and he goes, go around. Right? Well, I remember from the briefing, I'm flying a 747 apparently. Full power, gear up. Well, let's see what happens. Because this particular airplane's underpowered that we happen to be in. And it was a relatively high density altitude. Normally the golfers at the end of the runway, it's very similar to this, would have to duck when this particular airframe came over. Literally, because it didn't climb well. Thinking, well, all right, I'm doing what you told me. I'm not thinking I'm pilot in command, I wasn't in the right space. We didn't land gear up on the touch and go. The airplane stayed in ground effect and finally struggled into the air. I never in my life would have done that. We climb out, we get on downwind again. I actually do a landing. It's not pretty, but we survive it. Do a touch and go, come back, full stop, taxi in. I get out, I have to get out of the way. The devil gets out. And I'm no kidding, my future is set and it's not good. And my flight partner was an older gentleman, and he was from Sweden, and he walks up to me and goes, oh, how'd you do? You do good. No, I did not do good. Did bad, real bad. No, you do good. So I go in and I wash my face because I didn't want to make it look like, that I'd actually been almost ready to just melt down. And I sit down and there's a typewriter and he had a pink slip and he's typing on this typewriter in this little teeny table in this back room, an FBO, and he's typing. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, pink slip, and he's taking my certificate and probably go to the commercial. And he hands it to me, he says, sign this. He was meaner than that. And I look at it, and I sign it, and I notice on the top, I didn't notice the color. I saw pink. It wasn't pink, it was white. It said notice of approval. Well, while you're out there flying, I know you had your head up and locked today, but when you're out there flying with these, and I never heard another word he said. I passed. I did not hear what he was saying other than that first sentence. You had your head up and locked today, but when you're out there flying with these kids and that's all, then just noise. He passed me. Okay, good. So I'm traumatized forever. And I passed. What's that got to do with this? Turns out another friend of mine, a flight partner, Adam, he was going to have a check ride in 2 weeks with the same examiner. He goes, hey, what happened? I give him the long version of what I just told you because there's stuff that you can't say that I told him. But his happened to be down at FSDO. So he flew down to FSDO with the airplane, took the check ride down there. I find out 2 days later after his check ride, guess what this guy did? The same exact thing. Somewhere in the flight, he exploded and started screaming at Adam. And all Adam did was look at him and go, I knew this was coming. And it didn't bug him. It was no big deal. Guess what this guy's MO was? He decided he was going to weed out every individual that would give up and stop flying. He was trying to get me to quit and let go. Even though it went through my mind, thinking, well, if I open the door and undo the seatbelt, I can get out. It's only 1,000 feet. That kind of thing was going through my head, but I never stopped flying the airplane. So that was his method to ensuring we had good flight. Now, I'm not saying that made me a good flight instructor by any stretch, but at least I didn't quit. So for students, never quit. For flight instructors, any pilot or any part in your life, that's a big deal. Now, that resignation, the bad news is it's over. There's nothing else I can do. Anybody know the definition of a crash? Running out of airspeed, altitude, and ideas all at the same time. Have you heard that? So no kidding, there's always something you can do. And turns out in most CVRs, which thankfully aren't made public anymore, but when there's a fatal accident and they have the ability to record it and they listen back, there's always somebody is still flying the airplane trying to fix it. Because if you quit, it is over. Now, the other piece to this resignation idea, besides never give up and that little story about what I have, it's much bigger than that. And this is, to me, it's still amazing that this happened. There was a researcher in the early 50s looked back at World War II on all the American casualties during the war. And they looked back at everybody that was engaged in combat. And there was a percentage of frontline troops, a small percentage that were engaged, and there was a larger percentage of frontline troops who were not engaged. And they were trying to figure that idea out, and they were looking at all the fatalities from combat to make decisions. Well, while he's doing all this research, he came across some soldiers that weren't wounded, weren't shot, and just died. Literally just died, for real. He kept digging and he found references to the Pacific Islanders where they had medicine men. And no kidding, if the medicine man came up and took that magic stick and waved at you and said, tomorrow is your day, that person that was told, for whatever reason, would go sit down, and tomorrow came, and guess what happened? Person died. Nothing, they didn't do anything to that individual. So he found these references and thought, no, that's weird. So he decided to test it. Now this may sound bad, but he used lab rats. And here's the experiment, and you can still find this research. It's available. He took rats, really cute white lab rats, and got beakers full of water and put the rat in the beaker. And did this, and they would swim, and they'd swim, and they'd swim, and eventually the rat wears out and drowns. So he got a baseline on how long a rat can swim. Turns out they swim a pretty good time. But they get tired, get exhausted, and drown. Then he took the next rats, put them in. Oh, that's what it was. Before that, he got wild rats. He thought, all right, let's get mean rats. He got these wild rats. Because the lab rats are nice. They don't know what's coming. They're like, oh, hey, thanks, let's go swimming. And they're like, sad. Then he got these mean rats, wild, and he's trying to get the mean rats out from the box into the beaker, and he's got to get them in the bag so he doesn't get bitten, all this stuff. Well, turns out some of them died between there and the beaker. What? Then some, and I don't know what would make him think to do that, but he would cut off their whiskers, and they'd go in the water. Instead of swimming, they'd just go down to the bottom and drown themselves. He's like, this is getting weirder. Then he had the idea that, well, I'll put the rat in the water now that we got a baseline and we know the wild rats, that's weird that they're not living well, but let's put this lab rat back in there and let's put him in for about 5 minutes. And he swims for 5 minutes. And he takes the rat out and sits it down and then puts the rat back in. And I want to say the average was like 25 hours without taking the rat out, but once they took the rat out and put back in, the rat swam for like 8 more days. Whoa. Why? And he repeated this. What was the difference? So the rat that he didn't take out, 20 some hours, whatever it is, it was an average. Some were stronger, that they would eventually drown. You take a rat out, sit it down for a minute, put it back in, and swim for almost a week. What's the difference? Hope. Gave hope. So the deal is, on resignation, if you give up, it will happen. You can't ever quit. Ever. Okay, now I mentioned this last hour, or earlier this morning. These aren't minimized, turns out, by age or experience. So just because I'm where I'm at doesn't mean I'm immune to this stuff. I have to constantly be aware of these things. I do these on occasion when it's appropriate, when I catch myself having something like this. Having a hazardous attitude, I'll go, all right, yeah. Follow the rules are usually right. That's the reason they're there. Okay. Now, check this out. We seen this already? Yes. This is the actual order that the FAA here was to talk about that came out from the administrator last year, and I was only going to show you 2 pieces. I already had this figured in here before I realized they were going to talk about it, and I liked what I heard. So I love this because she said it all. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. That's great. And the other big piece of this was this one. This is the actual 2-page letter that the administrator signed. It's only 2 pages for the policy. It's simple. For an FAA document, that's nothing. But this is on the 2nd page. The FAA views those intentional, reckless deviations from regulatory standards as defined in the oversight, unacceptable risk to safety and posing the highest risk to safe operations in the NAS, the National Airspace System, and thus requiring strong enforcement. And they kept using them about flying under bridges. But this is fantastic. You're human, you're going to make mistakes. But if you do stuff intentionally, we're going to come after you. This is an appropriate response. I like that. They did a great job. Okay, now let's talk about some flight instructional traps. I've got 4 of them here, and we're going to talk about, I believe, 6 actually. So the grade student intervening too late, intervening too early, and multiple emergencies. These are common things that we can get sucked into in no particular order. We're going to talk about letting the student go too far or intervening too late. Now, if you're a beginning instructor, maybe it's because you don't know when to intervene. Well, you're an instructor. You've been certified to know when to intervene. So when should you intervene? Well, turns out in the rotorcraft world, it's all the time. You're not trimming it up and letting go. You're not going to let them fly. It's a different world. We're in the fixed wing world, okay. There are higher priority places where you got to be ready to intervene, mainly in the flare, perhaps on takeoff, or in the pattern. Intervening too late, for me, this has happened when I was so intent on helping the student learn what they needed to learn, and generally it's the landing. I had one particular student, early on, I had students that were having difficulty, and I was given those students, and it was a challenge for me. I'm like, okay, let's go, let's make this happen. This particular student was of very small stature, and she just couldn't get the flare attitude. So I'm talking her through the flare, and she flared just a little too quick. And we ballooned just a little. It was just a little balloon. I'm justifying this, can you tell? Sorry. It still hurts. So, like, hold it. And what that defined was hold the pitch attitude, hold it, okay, lower. And I wanted her to lower the pitch attitude a half a degree. Guess what happened? I intervened too late. In fact, the plane quit flying. What's that called? A stall. She flared and did a really nice job, and it felt like we were 40 feet AGL. We were maybe 5, which is actually pretty high. 172. Flared about here, the airplane stopped. I felt it go. And I instantly intervened and held the pitch attitude and instantly carb heat off, or full power, and I'm pushing the carb heat in when we hit. We hit so hard on the mains, I felt the wheels came up and touched the bottom of the wings. Now that can't happen, but that's how it felt. Those giant spring steel gear launched us back into the sky. Bam, back up, and I'm still at full power. And the good thing is, I know I need to keep the landing attitude. Full power. We hit again. But it's on the mains, and it's hard. We go back up. Still full power, and now this time I've got enough energy that we just settle in ground effect and we climb out. Wow. That happened once. Why did that happen? I was too focused on helping. I wasn't listening to the airplane. So part of your job, I've got it. I was going to tell you later, but I'm going to have to tell you now. The other part of your job is we're translators as flight instructors. You know what the airplane says. You can speak its language. You need to be able to translate what it's saying and give that information to somebody who's just learning how to understand what the airplane's saying. But I wasn't listening to what the airplane was saying. I ignored it. It told me plenty of time what was going to happen, and I ignored it because I was too busy. I was distracted or over-focused on making that happen. So after that never happened. Once we would get down into the flare, and if things weren't going well, instead of talking someone through it like that, guess what I'd say? Go around. It was that easy. I did down the plane. Maintenance checked it. The airplanes are very sturdy. It's a good thing because I would have owned that one. Okay, now here's another example of intervening too late. Let's see, Aaron, can you hit? Uh-oh, I lost him. Got play on this one? Thank you, sir. So this is a Seminole. Can you tell what's going on? Landing gear retracted. It's got an audience. Yay. Everybody clapping. They knew it was coming. The student, I don't know if you noticed, his legs were coming out of that window before the airplane stopped. And that's nice to know that that emergency window works really well. And here comes engine 73. So they all knew it was happening. How could this be too late? An example of late intervention. Well, it turns out you don't know the whole story. The FAA actually flew up to watch this. They knew this was going to happen. But the late intervention happened about 2.5 hours prior. So there were 2 students, an instructor on board this particular airplane. They were doing touch and goes. And the instructor, let's call him Ted because that's his name, and it was a private pilot add-on, multi-engine add-on, and they were doing landings, and the student flared too high, and the Seminole stopped flying and fell out of the sky, and fell about 5 feet. And they hit on the mains, and they hit so hard on the mains, they bounced back up. Ted took the controls, added full power, but now he hears something, and they're climbing out. Guess what he hears? He hears boom, boom, boom. And they're climbing out, and now it's getting louder and meaner sounding. It's kind of like something wants in real bad. Guess what wants in? The left main. They hit so hard that the oleo strut dieseled. It turned into a diesel cylinder. They hit so hard, diesel doesn't need an ignition source. It compressed and exploded apart, the oleo strut. Blew the left main off. It blew it in half. The whole wheel and tire assembly now broke off and is on the left side of the wing, and it's still attached to the airplane by any idea what it's attached by? The brake line. Turns out that's a pretty stout brake line on the Seminoles. That's cool. So it's stretched out about this far, and now the wind is blowing it, and it is now beating the bottom of the flap, the left flap, and it's trying to flip up on top of the wing. So Ted's continuing to climb out, and they look and they see this wheel popping up, and now it's actually angry at the flap and wrecks the flap. So they climb out and they depart. They stay away from houses, and they head out where there is nothing, and they climb out, and they're hanging out around a nice, safe altitude. And eventually, the brake line, after about 20 minutes, it was a long time, finally gave up. It couldn't hang on to that. And those are big wheel tire assemblies. That's a big deal. Broke off, and now nothing's trying to get in, except now they've got a destroyed left flap, and he knows he's got no left main. So that's what happened here. They decided to continue to fly while they talked to ops and all this other stuff and get everybody involved. And the tower reported it, and FSDO found out about it, so FSDO flies up to watch the perfect landing. So it turns out Ted, the flight instructor, has a fantastic airline career, believe it or not. But this is a perfect example of intervening too late. In his discussions, he said, yeah, I didn't think the plane was ready to stall. He just misjudged it. That's all it was. He actually was a good instructor, but he misjudged that. So the outcome on this accident was that an accident? Anybody remember NTSB 830, that definition of the accident? That's not part of the deal, but being flight instructors, it turns out all pilots are supposed to know this. Yeah, it wasn't property damage. There was no property damage over $25,000. There's some very expensive cows out there, but the wheel didn't hit any of those. Not a firewall. Turns out on that landing, they did a gear up landing, so turns out landing gear are excluded. And on the landing, propellers are excluded, flaps are excluded, skin damage is excluded, and Piper did a great job by putting those reinforcing ribs on their fuselages. Those are great skid plates. That's a secondary benefit of that. There were some antennas. It was not an accident on Ted's record. It was an incident. And this is before the compliance philosophy. But he had no intention of wrecking the airplane. He was trying to be a good flight instructor, but he misjudged that when it intervened too late. Whoa, what's this? If you see this, it's a bad day. Something's not right. I took this up by Green Bay. I was out skiing with my friends. If you know Green Bay, yeah. What's wrong with this picture is the cows can't jump that far out of the water. What's that thing on the left? Very photogenic. Not dolphin. Porpoise. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back in 10. We'll pick up on the porpoise at 10.